היי לכולם, מה נשמע? מקווה ששומעים אותי, תעשו איזשהו חיווי לראות אם חלילה לא שומעים אותי, שלא יהיה כאילו פדיחות, אני מדברת לעצמי, עושה איזה מונולוג. שומעים? תגיבו בתגובות אם שומעים. אני אקח את זה כלא. רגע, בוא נראה, שומעים, פנן. טוב, אני חייב להגיד, I'm going to switch to English now because this meetup will be held in English because we have a special guest with us. We have Stefan Fluin from Google. He's the head of the DevRel team at Google, so we're super excited to have him. He will be the second talk we have for today. We're going to start with a talk by Nir Kaufman. Who will also deliver his talk in English. I just wanted to remind you all that Angular Up, the annual conference in Israel for Angular, is definitely happening. We set the date for December. We're very confident then that the whole COVID thing will end, and if not, we will have another date scheduled. Do not worry about it. We'll always take care of your safety first. I will show a discount code throughout the talks where you can get your ticket for 10% off in case you haven't purchased your ticket yet. And also, I'm going to post a raffle where we're giving away 2 JetBrains licenses. JetBrains have been our sponsors for a long, long time, and we're very grateful for that. So it's 2 licenses for 1 year of any JetBrains product of your choice, and a free ticket for Angular Up. So super excited, stick around, we're going to raffle at the end. And now I am going to give the stage to Nir Kaufman.
Yep.
How you doing, Nir?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, because sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Because of what?
Because it's an international meetup, kind of, and we've got Stefan, yeah. So you need to suffer my broken English. So, but I was talking like too much, like I think, for the past 2 months with all of my broadcasts. So, hey everyone, today you're gonna hear me in English, the English version of.
Because in case you haven't noticed, Nir has been giving weekly or bi-weekly webinars ever since COVID started and keeping this community alive, which is amazing. So thank you, Nir, for like really maintaining the Israeli community with your free webinars. So I'm going to be quiet now and give the stage to you.
Yeah, share my screen, Noor. Here you go. So this is the title for my talk today. I don't have a fancy title because I don't really know what I'm going to talk about, but that's going to be fun. So let me jump right in and introduce myself quickly. My name is Nir Kaufman. I'm an Angular GDE. I'm working at 500 Tech, where we help companies to build complicated front ends for, I think, almost 10 years now, located in the United States. Co-organizer this amazing group for 7 years. And if you know me, you know that I like to speak, I like to talk, I like to teach, I like to share my knowledge with everyone. You can find more info about me and all the relevant links to the code, slides, and whatever by visiting my very minimal website. You can see the address down there, nir.life, because I'm still alive. Like Nur said, first of all, I want to say like a huge thank you for the amazing Israel community. I've been recorded almost 30 hours of those free webinars and still counting. And thank you for the feedback and your support. Yep. So happy that I'm still part of this community, although I'm on the other side of the ocean. I've been working with Angular for the past 10 years, coding, teaching, singing, you name it. Let me tell you a secret. No one knows everything, which is a known secret. Actually, if you want to become an expert, the first step is the acknowledgement that you can't know anything. So, or everything, anything, everything, whatever, you get the idea. I learned something new today. This is my motivation. If I'm giving a talk, if I'm teaching someone, if I talk with someone in the community and I can teach him something new, it made my day. I mean, that's the whole reason for everything, that for whatever I'm doing. And obviously, personally, I like to learn new stuff as well. And Angular got a lot to offer, so we got a lot to talk about. But enough about slide. Let me jump into my talk theme. Before I jump into some live coding, a live demo, I would like to share with you my favorite movie ever called The Prestige. I'm not going to spoil it in case you haven't seen it yet. but this is the picture. You should see it. Great movie. I'm gonna share with you some quotes because it's related to what I'm about to talk about. So every great magic trick consists of three parts or acts. The first one is the pledge. The magician show you something ordinary. Then there is the turn. The magician take the ordinary something and make it to do something extraordinary. And finally, the prestige. You wouldn't clap yet because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it back. So this is like a bunch of quotes from the movie. The reason I show you this is because this is what I'm gonna try to do during my talk. I'm not gonna dive too deep into Angular because I'm doing it in all of my other free webinars, but I will try to surprise you and show you some things that you might not be familiar with. So let's jump right in. My first favorite command is to create a workspace, an empty workspace, because Angular CLI support empty workspace. You've got more than one project. Go ahead and use this command. Let's do it live. Let's do it right now. I'm gonna hit my desktop and I'm gonna run this command: npx ngnew my list, the name of the workspace, create application, false. Meanwhile, that's going to be very quick because there's not going to be any dependencies right now because there is no app. It's just a workspace. I'm going to jump into my favorite IDE. Someone recently told me that I'm probably one of the last speakers that actually demonstrate stuff with WebStorm and not VS Code because VS Code is so popular right now. All right. So how an empty workspace look like? Well, empty. If you hit the Angular JSON, Angular JSON, you see the minimal amount of configuration, an object of project, which means that now I can go ahead and generate my first application. Any generate, generate application, and I'm going to use the flag. Let's call it the playground because we're going to play with it. And I'm going to use this flag, minimal, which is going to give me a minimal project. In other words, it's just going to skip testing. So I wouldn't say it's the best practice. Don't skip testing, but sometimes you have more than one application, maybe one of them you want to configure as a playground, so testing is not that important. And whatever, I just want to teach you more about this flag. So now you can see the Angular JSON is becoming a little bit more populated, and you can see those minimal configurations. So by default, it's going to be inline style, inline template, skip test. Usually, if I'm using inline template and inline styles, I'm also go ahead and use flat and set it to true. The reason that you've got this nice code completion here in IntelliSense is because Angular JSON got a schema where you can see right here, and the IDE know how to work with it. So let's jump right into the app component, which currently contains a lot of initial HTML. And let me remove everything. And we start by saying Angular playground. And let's try to serve it. ng-serve. It's enough for me to just type ng-serve because if you can see here, you might have many projects, but you have a default project. So if you call ng-serve and you not specify the name of the project that you want to serve, it's gonna just pick it up from the default project. In my case, that's the playground. So let's give it a second. Meanwhile, let me jump to the browser, hit refresh. When it's ready, we're gonna see our app component render. Here we go. And back to the slide. So the first one we learned, create application false, an empty workspace. Now we create multiple applications that share the same node modules and save a lot of space. The next one is when you create a workspace, you can generate multiple applications by calling ng-generate application playground. And if you like, you can pass the minimal flag to get this default configuration, which basically skip tests. Next. So we've got an app, it's up and running. And let's say, we build huge apps with Angular. We're not building like small demos. So sometimes it takes time for the app to initialize. For example, let's go ahead and implement on init. Let me implement this interface. And here I'm just gonna do a set timeout, and I'm gonna take this title, and we're just gonna say like app ready, and let's give it 5 seconds. All right, and the title, yeah, well, the title can start as undefined. That's cool. And here we're just gonna bind the title. What's gonna happen right now, we need to wait because the app is initialized. Maybe you're loading some data. Maybe you register some provider on ng app init. But anyways, this is not a very good user experience. So the next trick, I don't know if it's a trick, it's a technique that I'm using, is how can we improve the user experience and get something rendered on the screen, but without diving into service worker and any other, like, you know, sometimes it's complete like overhead libraries and techniques. So a lot of Angular developers, for some reason, afraid to touch the index HTML. So the next message from me to you is, well, the index HTML going to be delivered to the browser right away. So let me pull Bootstrap in. I'm just pulling Bootstrap from a CDN, and then let me drop some um, static HTML. All right. Here you see a bunch of static HTML that I can render because it doesn't need to be dynamic. It doesn't need to be a component. And I call it like Angular embedded. It's not, you know, embedded because you can drop the app root from this point and on. Everything that's going to be rendered right here is going to be Angular. But what's going to happen right now is if I jump back to the browser, once you refresh, you see something immediately, all right? Immediately, because the HTML rendered immediately. And then it's going to take some time, but you're going to see your app eventually. So if you have some static markup that you can just throw on the index HTML, to give to users something to see until your app is loading, great. Minimal amount of like effort to achieve a much better user experience. So my next tip for you would be, where is it? Embedded Angular app. Just remember that you can put some static markup at in school. But what if you're saying, all right, but that's not the case because, for example, this menu, it should be an Angular component. I can't just hard code some HTML just to make something, you know, showing there. So let's do it. Let's take the side menu as is. I'm gonna scroll up. I'm gonna find the markup. I think that's it. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and generate a component. Let's call this component side bar because it makes sense. I'm gonna make it flat. I don't need a directory for it. And here I've got this component. I'm remind you, I'm on the index HTML, not on the app components template. I'm gonna use it right here, app sidebar. And then I'm gonna go ahead and throw the markup on the app sidebar. Sorry. Sorry again. I think I lost it. No, here it is, right? And then I'll go back here and I will expect to see it, but obviously I won't because we have only one Bootstrap component. My next tip for me to you is sometimes there are components that you like to render which take less time than the main app component. So it's totally valid to add another Bootstrap component. For example, the sidebar. Each one of the components that we introduced to this array, to the Bootstrap component, it's going to be rendered on the index HTML. So now go back here. I see the menu, which is an Angular component. So it's fully dynamic and working. And then I see my app and I get better user experience just by, you know, rendering some stuff. So don't afraid to use this index HTML. It's super cool and it's useful. And look, all right, you can render different parts of your app. Each one of them going to take less or more time, and you can get much better user experience. So that was my next tip for you, which is more than one Bootstrap component. Go ahead and do it. All right. Now I want to show you something. There is a lot of discussion in the community, and a lot of people ask me, Nir, how do you keep your hair so healthy and black because you're 40 and so? And they also ask Nir, why do you prefer inline templates? There is a lot of advantages of like using external URL. So let me answer. Let me give you an answer for the second question. I'm going to generate another component. Let's go to Angular component, and let's call this component, I don't know, a page, because, well, it's going to represent a page. And now for this page component, I'm going to take the name because I'm lazy, and I'm going to create a file, and I'm going to call this file page dev HTML. Yeah. Don't ask again. Add to GitHub because I want to share this code with you later on. And I'm going to add another file, and let's call this file page prod. Dev for development, prod for production. On the app prod, this is layout for production, right? And the other template, the dev, is development mode. And the next technique that I want to show you is, hey, decorators being initialized during build time, which means that I can easily do something like this. If the environment is production, go ahead and give me this file. Oh, this file. What was the name of it? Page component. Oh, yeah. You know what? Page prod. Give me page dot prod dot html. If it's development, just give me dev. And that now, if I'm building my app or saving my app, first of all, let's go to the app component and actually use this page, app page, right? So right now, I'm in development mode. But if I go ahead and build my app in production, let's change production to true, I can build it with layout for production. Now I use this demo like production and development because I had a use case where we had like the special development mode when we stripped out a lot of the styles just to focus on the functionality. But you can take it like to other scenarios. Maybe you have different layouts for, I don't know, whatever, for environment mobile or environment other client. I don't know, it doesn't matter, but you can do this, and actually it is very useful. Yes, I know we can create a component and then ng ifs and then like replace templates, and there's other ways to do it, but I found this very useful, especially if you've got a lot of HTML, if you've got a lot of markup, and because it's less ng ifs and ng switch and stuff like this. So if you wasn't aware of this option, now you do. So hopefully you learn something out of it. Here's the snippet for you. I'm going to share these slides with you, obviously. Next, let's talk about the event emitter for a second. Just quick reminder, all right? Let's say that I've got a button here. And let's do a click. You know what? Not here. Let's take it on the page component, because I want a child component. That's the reason I jumped right here. And let's get rid of those templates for a second and just, do a hard code page component. And here I'm gonna render a button. And let's give it, just make it look nice. BTN large, BTN primary, and click me. And let's give this app click handler. Let's just do, I don't know, action emit. And because this is a child component, so usually we write code that looks like this. Action, it's going to be new event emitter, And that's it. And we want to export it maybe as an output, and then we can register to it. Now it's all nice. The thing that I want to show you and remind you that the event emitter extend subject. A lot of Angular developers kind of missed this feature, which means that I can take this action and I can actually subscribe to it and get the event stream of events. And for now, I'm just going to log it, right? So if you miss this fact that the event emitter is actually a subject and you can subscribe to whatever going on there, well, now you know it. Let's see if that actually works. But it's a one thing to talk about stuff. It's we need the proof. Show me the proofs. All right. So I don't know if you can see it right here. It's undefined because, by the way, I totally forgot to pass the actual event, but you get the idea. Cool. Right. So just remember that event emitters are subjects and you can do wonderful stuff with it. Event emitter is a subject. Next, element selector. Let's talk about directives for a second. So if I go back to my app and I'm going to create a directive now, Angular directive, I call this directive button. I click OK. I'm going to implement on this directive. I'm going to implement something very, very, very basic. I just want to make it work basically. So I'm going to do something that looks like this. First of all, I'm going to use it on my button. And then let's do this. Let's do a host binding and bind to the disabled property and is disabled. Let's say that it started as false and then do something which is, I don't know if it makes sense, but sometimes it is. Actually, I use it. Host listener for a click and then handle click or just disable button. And then I can go ahead and do this is disabled equals true, right? So this directive is kind of useful because I just created the one-time click button, all right? Let's see if it works. Almost. Almost means no, yeah? I click it and it's disabled, all right? Very useful. Sometimes not. I had a lot of apps that I use when I want all the buttons to be disabled. But wait a second, I want all the buttons in my app to be disabled, like click once. So yeah, this is very declarative. But if you've got a use case where you don't want to add an extra attribute here, what I want to remind you that the directive can actually be defined. The selector of the directive can be defined as an element. So right now I'm kind of overriding. It's not a really override. I'm adding functionality to the element button, which gonna be very interesting. Every time you've got a button, you don't need to add an extra directive because that is functionality, the directive instance is created because I use the button tag. Now, you might think about it, yeah, there's a lot of magic, a lot going on behind the scene, but I can tell you this, if you use Angular as a meta framework, you build your own solution, you've got like a set of your own logic and components, sometimes it's very, very useful. And anyways, I would like you to know and remind you that there are some use cases. For example, every input got some logic, every button got some logic when it just become very helpful and maybe clean up your code a little bit. Oh, you can use element selectors. Go ahead and do it. Oh, my favorite topic. So recently I started to record a serious free webinar, a full webinar. It's going to be like 10 lessons on dependency injection. We've got 2 chapters in Hebrew, native Hebrew, but I am recording an English version. The first chapter in English is already live on YouTube. Let me create a directory, not a directory. You know what? Let's create a service. Let's create a class. Let's create a logger because we want to keep it simple. So I would like to start with an interface. I want to export an interface. I'm going to call this interface log handler. And the log handler interface is a very focused interface. It's got a log, and you can log a message, which is a string, which return void, and that's it. Keep your interfaces focused. A great tip. Now, obviously, maybe I would like to make it generic because I don't know what's the type of message, and maybe it can be an info and stuff like this. But those are best practices. And now I'm just trying to show you some techniques and API that you might miss along the way. Now, I can't use the log handler interface as a dependency, as an injection token, because interfaces are artifacts of TypeScript, so we can't use them as tokens. What I can do is go ahead and create an injection token. So first of all, let's create two classes. Let's call this one console logger. It's gonna implement log handler, and I'm gonna create another class. Let's call it alert. Or you know what? Yeah, alert logger, just for the fun of it. Both of them implement log handler. Uh, let's call it an API logger. You know what? I changed my mind. So I need to implement a log in each one of them. This one gonna send it to a remote logging server. Is the API logger. Now the console logger that's gonna console log logging to browser console. Fix all problems. Cool. Now look carefully. I'm not exporting those classes. They're going to be private. Now I'm going to create an injection token, which we're going to call a logger. It's going to be a new injection token. Injection token. Now, type of the injection token, it's going to be a log handler, so it can be typed. And it's kind of like a known thing that when you create an injection token, the first argument is a string, so I can give it a description like lookup key for a logger. The less known API is that it can be tree shakeable, and I can define everything I need right here. For example, I can tell him I'm going to provide it in root, this logger specifically, and I'm going to give you a factory. I'm going to tell you what I want you to return. And actually, I can do the same trick here. I can take production, environment, production. And if it's production, I'm going to return you console logger. And otherwise, I'm going to return you API logger. And actually, I wanted to do the exact opposite of what I just did. If it's production, go ahead and set the logs to API. Otherwise, just give me a new console logger. Now let's fix all the problems that I've got here. Provided in, right? Factory is a function that return this, and now we're happy. Now what I want you to notice is that, look at this, all right? I've got two private classes, two different implementation, concrete classes. I've got an interface that I'm exporting, and I've got my token, which is a tree shakeable token. It's also no, it's not just an injection token, just a key. It's also got the instructions of which injector I should use and what should I give you in return. And you can obviously add some more dependencies. And if you're following my dependency injection course, you're going to learn all of this. But look at this, it's beautiful because now I can write my app in a way that, go back to the page component, that I don't need to know anything about concrete implementation. I can inject something very abstract like logger. I'm going to know that I'm going to get a logger. I'm going to know that the interface is going to be a log handler. I have no idea if it's going to log to API or not. It's dependent on the environment. So here I'm going to use my this. I'm not going to have any this if I'm not going to mark it as private. Now I can use this log, and let's just log, I don't know, uh, page component, page component init. Make it red so it stick out, all right? But I can't make it red because I haven't implemented supporting colors. All right, cool. Let's see if it works first, all right? So, I told you before, to talk about it, that's one thing. The other thing is to actually see it work. So I'm gonna refresh, send it to a remote logging server, which means that I'm on production environment. So if I go ahead and change the production to false, I'm in development environment. So now let's see what's gonna happen and logging to browser. Look at the beauty of it, all right? The page component or every part of your system is depend on pure abstraction. And actually, if you look closely, you see that in this file, it's a standalone file and those classes are not being exported. And obviously you can play with the structure and everything. I got it on my slide. Injection tokens can do more than what you probably think. And this is a very nice technique. Next, service lifecycle binding. Actually, this one is pretty much straightforward. For this example, let me change the code a little bit just to make it simple for the demo. I want to export the console logger directly. Now I'm going to implement another interface that might look familiar. So I'm going to implement on destroy. So let's implement this method on destroy. And here I'm gonna do a console log, and now I can make it red so it stick out, and we can see it easily. Color red, and here let's say that the console logger destroyed. So many typos in so I'm fighting the nature of being a man. Yeah, I can't do two things like talking and coding at the same time. All right, console log has been destroyed, and I'll take the same thing and let's just create a constructor here because I want to know when it was created. Console logger created. What's the point of implementing on destroy? Well, a less known feature of Angular is that if you configure your service on the node injector, uh, uh, on the node injector of a specific component, for example, if I'm going to provide it here, console logger, it's going to be binded to this component lifecycle, which is super cool. Let me show you how it works. We've got a console logger here. Let's inject it. Now I'm injecting a very specific logger, console logger. Let's go back here and see if we destroyed something. Reference console logger is not defined. Where is not defined? Maybe it's just a refresh. Maybe it's not. Yep, all right. Console logger created. You can see it right here. Actually, let me do something like this. It's going to be, all right. Console logger was created. So that's cool. Now, let's go to our app component and just, put a button here with a click that's going to take visible equals not visible. Let's call it toggle. And on the class, I want to bind it to the click. Now we can initialize it right here, which is a Boolean, and it start as true. And basically that's it. I can remove this thing. Let's do the title hard-coded. App component. Super cool. All right. And obviously here, let's put an ng if. Cool. So let's see what's going on. Console logger is created, but what's going to happen if I'm going to make it, all the buttons are disabled, yeah? All the buttons are disabled because our button directive Still on, right? Console logger created, console logger destroyed, which means that if you write a service and this service is provided on the injector level, injector, like bind it to a component, it's going to be binded to the component lifecycle, which is super cool. Which means that you can actually create logic like that you want to run when your service is destroyed. Now, if you don't bind it to the component, all right, nothing happened, and your destroy will never be invoked. Cool. So that was my next tip for you. Service lifecycle binding. Uh, it's gonna end soon. Yeah, I'm gonna hit my time limit in a few minutes. So you know what? Let me skip ahead. First of all, let me ask you this. Please write a message if you like. Have you learned something new from this speed coding bunch of tips? I'm curious. I wanna know if I was able to show you something that you didn't know. I mean, I'm gonna wait for a second. Oh yeah, I can see some comments. Thank you very much. Nice. All right. That was my first question. The second gonna be, um, all right. Let's say that everything that I just show you, all of this magic, you already knew. If that's the case, by the way, send me your CV. I might have a job offer for you, but I want to surprise you. I want to show you something. Remember the intro. Remember the prestige. Remember of taking something ordinary and make something out of extraordinary with it. I'm gonna try to do it now. So let's say, all right, you've seen my talk. You've seen it all. Cool stuff, cool Angular stuff. But yeah, all right, you see it. You've got a lot of experience, which is cool. So I'm going back to my app component. Now I'm gonna try to surprise you. Here I've got two buttons. One of them saying send me away. The other one saying on the window. Very plain and strange names, but hopefully it's gonna make sense soon. I'm gonna implement those methods of the component. This is the last demo, and then I'm gonna move away and let Stefan do his magic. I'm gonna create this method, and I wanna implement this method. And on this window, I'm gonna do something like this title. Uh, uh, I am alive, which means that basically when I click on this button, I'm gonna change the title. All right, let's see if it works. Uh, no, because what happened? What happened? What happened? Injection, 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 or listener. On context menu is not a function. What I did wrong. Sometimes the hard refresh solved everything. So this is like, all right, what's the surprise here? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to trick us? And the answer is obviously, yeah. Now I'm gonna do something that might surprise you. A lot of build-up, but I think it's gonna worth it. Here I'm gonna create a constant. I'm gonna call it a new window, and I'm gonna use a window open, and the URL will be empty. This will be empty. And here I can provide some defaults like width gonna be 400, and what else? And height gonna be 400. I'm creating a new window when send me away is a click. Let's see if it works. Yeah. All right. So we're getting a new window. I expect it to be a little bit more it's smaller than this. I don't know why it's so huge. I think I messed up with something there. But what I can do, I can just copy a snippet of this create new window just to make sure that I'm getting a window on the right size, because the size is important in this use case. So let me just check it out. If I didn't miss with something, no, it was the exact same snippet. All right, cool. So now we've got like a new window. Hard refresh actually solve it. I'm gonna inject one of my best friends in Angular. First of all, private host element ref. Watch my 20 hours free Angular View deep dive webinar, and you learn a lot of cool stuff that you can do with this element ref. Next, I'm gonna inject a renderer, renderer 2, because 2 is always better than 1. I mean, most of the cases, like Robocop 2 was much better than Robocop 1, but that's not the scope. This is like, we can take it offline if you like. Next, now I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna take this renderer. I'm gonna call append child. Append child ask me for the parent. Well, the parent gonna be the new window. I don't know, the new window document body. And what I want to send to the new window document body is this host element, which basically I'm going to send my app component. All right, native element. And wait a second, what just happened? Can I send my Angular app into a new window? Yes, I can. I just sent it. You see, it's not here anymore. But is it still an Angular app? Yes, it is. Look, the button still works, same context. Let's look at this again. All right. I'm kind of sending my component, my app, to a completely different window, which is the same Angular app, and it still works because everything implemented within the same component. Now, if you wanted to be like super fancy, you can implement just function called copy styles, and then you can go ahead and use these copy styles to just copy all the styles from the current document to the new window document to get a better experience. But look at this. Let's give it a try. Send me away. New window. Almost. Where is my CSS? Hard refresh. Send me away. Here I've got my entire app and it's still alive. Whew, I hope that was my prestige. I really hope that this last example inspired you and show you that you can do some amazing stuff with Angular and hopefully inspired you to implement some really, really cool features. Now I'm going to wrap everything up quickly and let Stefan take the stage. Let's do it. Oh, I can see in the comment, wow, yeah, that's my day. That's the reason that I'm doing everything that I'm doing. Yeah. I've got a snippet for you. You're gonna get these slides with all those good stuff and the code. Cool. Let's wrap it up. Have you learned something new today? Well, I've seen the comment, and I'm very happy to see comments like this is witchcraft. Nice one. Wow, that's the point. Because remember, and this is a very important message to all the juniors out there that look at people like me. We are speakers. We are Angular GDEs. It doesn't make us like, it doesn't mean that we know everything. I'm working with Angular for the past 10 years. I'm still learning. All right. You want to become an expert? Go ahead, write some code, play with it, explore. That's the way you do it. Read the docs. The docs are not perfect. That's cool. But there is a lot of information there. All right. Explore the source, not everything. Focus on a feature. Pick an API. Try to dive and try to to play with it. See what's going on. And most importantly, write a lot of code. Thank you very much. You are more welcome to keep in touch. If you know me, you know that I'm very responsive. You can ask me anything. You can consult with me. My email is like, it's out there, and all the rest of the link you can find at nir.life. Whew, I talked too much. And you know what? It's so important to me. So I want to go to the first slide and just tell you thank you again. If you just joined and you're not familiar with our Angular Sunday clubs, 30 hours of content in native Hebrew. And that's it, I think. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Nir. That was amazing. Even I had fun, and I can't code to save my life, so I didn't understand a word it.
You learned something new?
Actually, yes. Now I know what your new series is about because you released that new free webinars of injection thingies. Well, all of you know that I can code. I'm a community manager, but I can code, and you all know it. It's no surprise there.
Anyone can code. All right.
Anyone can code. Prove it. Okay, so thank you so much. Again, you can see the link at the bottom to enter the raffle for a free ticket to Angular Up and 2 WebStorm licenses. And now I'm going to give the stage to our amazing guest, Stefan Fluin. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, and I want to thank Nir for such a great talk. I wrote in the chat that even I learned something, which is always awesome because we're all on a learning journey, right? Nobody knows everything.
Great. Aaron asked you where he can get the source code. Sorry, Stephen, just a quick question for Nir.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm going to share the links everywhere. I mean, we're going to send it. I'm going to send it to you, Nur, put it on the Meetup page, on my website. If you miss something and you want extra, just drop me an email. All right. Like I said, very responsive.
Great. So we'll post everything, including a link to this video, which is recorded and will be available on YouTube later on. So thank you so much. And the stage.
Awesome. Thank you so much for again having me. Hello, everyone. So today, I don't have 11 cool things to show you like Nir did, but I do want to show you one of the most interesting things you can do if it comes into leveling up your RxJS skills. As we all know, there's a lot of RxJS anyway. You don't have to use it for any time, but there are places where starting to use it can add a ton of value to your life. And one of the ways I wanted to do that is by showing you how to create your own operators. So my name is Stephen Fluin, as you mentioned. I'm the relationship on the Angular team, and really that is that I have one of the best jobs in the world. The two main parts of my job. First, helping developers and organizations be successful in Angular. Second, understanding what it's like being someone who's building Angular applications every day to make those applications better, so we can reflect those teams on those teams as we continue to evolve the platform to serve the audience.
Sorry to interrupt, but if there's something with a different mic maybe that you can switch to, that would be super helpful.
There definitely is.
Oh, much better. Thank you so much. This is like a way better mic. Thank you so much. Oh, now we can't hear you.
All right.
There we go.
I think we're all good now.
Thank you so much.
Sorry about that, everyone. So we're here today to talk about RxJS operators, and my name is Stephen Fluin. I am on the Angular team at Google, and basically my job is to make you guys all better developers. So let's dive into doing that and trying to level up our RxJS skills a little bit. So the first thing I want to start with is an acknowledgement, which is that RxJS is really hard. This is a set of new concepts that people have to learn. It's a new set of principles, a new set of patterns. But ultimately, for many developers, it's a set of patterns that make their code more elegant, make their code more impactful, more powerful, makes them more able to share awesome snippets. I remember all the way back a few years ago learning AngularJS and having to figure out what a promise was. And it was like, this is crazy. Like, you can hand something around that's not a value, but can give someone else a value. Like, that was a mind shift for me. And then the same thing sort of happened when we started learning about RxJS and observables. And we really do believe that when used right and when used to solve real problems, RxJS can help a ton of developers. But as I started to learn these things, I felt a little frustrated that this was me on my first day of learning RxJS and thinking, there's so much asynchronicity happening on the web. And when you look at it kind of very broadly, what's happening is that there is a lot of asynchronicity on the web, right? We don't want everything to happen synchronously. We don't want almost anything to block the main thread. And so we are always trying to yield. We are always trying to build events and do things in the right order. And things like promises, things like observables can actually help us a lot with that. So really getting under the hood of trying to understand how not only to use these things, but also how to build them can really take your RxJS skills and level them up. What ends up happening after you've used RxJS and once you've built a few operators of your own and you understand some of the things that are going on underneath, the code that looks complex and looks really scary can start to look a little bit more like this, where instead of seeing the individual lines of code and just trying to understand what the pipe operators all the time, you actually start to see the intent. You start to see, what are these operators trying to do and what do they mean to my application. And when you start leveling up to the level of creating your own operators, you can do that even more. And so we're going to go through this in 3 parts. First, I'm going to try and answer the question, do I have to create my own operators? Second, we'll talk about how you could build some with composition. And then we'll talk about how you could build some operators from scratch. So the question that I get from a lot of audiences, do I have to go and build operators? And the answer is relatively simple. Yeah, you're going to need to build your own operators. At some point when you're building an application, at some point when you're leveling up your skills, as you're growing into larger and larger teams, being able to build your own operators is an essential skill for really any web developer that's doing these sorts of asynchronous chaining of events, which is basically every web developer at this point. You can think about it a little bit like methods, right? Like you could say, oh, methods are really complicated. Why can't I just build everything with for loops and while loops and if statements? You totally could, but then your code is going to be unreadable, right? So here is a bunch of RxJS code where you've got some observable, you're piping it into a merge map, and then you've got an inline arrow function, you're returning things. This is relatively complicated code executing multiple operators, but you don't actually need it to look this complicated, right? Just like we use methods to break code down into simpler chunks that are more understandable, you can do the exact same thing with operators. And so this code could be theoretically refactored into something like this, where maybe I create a new operator called console log RPC error, and then I can say response.pipe. And what that does is that upgrades my response observable, just like we were taking in the previous one, and we're applying all that extra logic as an abstraction, as a piece that I don't need to worry about in this context when I'm actually using it. So just like methods, RxJS operators make our code simpler. And so being able to control that and do that yourself is an essential skill. So I like to say that writing more RxJS in terms of like being able to get into it, creating your own operators and understanding how operators work can actually allow you to write less RxJS, right? You can abstract and simplify your code so that you're only looking at the right complexity at the right time. So there's a lot of different cases where you should be building an operator. So one of the first ones is whenever you find yourself repeating yourself. So if you're not following dry patterns, this is a code smell, right? This is something that we as developers learn to say, and maybe that's the wrong thing. Maybe I shouldn't be taking every single place that I call HTTP and passing it through a bunch of maps and a bunch of filters, right? If I create an operator, I can share that code across. And sharing is really an essential piece because what we find is that a lot of developers are creating functionality that maybe they should be using beyond their code base and taking that operator and sharing that with others. There's a whole bunch of operators that I rely on that aren't part of the core RxJS set that save me a ton of time as an engineer. Building your own custom operators also give you a level of isolation, right? So you can look at an operator without having to worry about all the context. You can just look at what is coming in to my operator, what is leaving my operator. And that simplification, that isolation of the concepts makes it much easier to debug, much easier to maintain. And then a huge part of maintenance is testability. If you are trying to test an operator chain and you're just copying and pasting the code again, that is not a good test. But if you pull out an abstract bunch of functionality into a individual operator, you can test that operator in isolation, and then you can test the usage of that operator without having to conflate those two concerns, which is really, really helpful. So before you go and build your own operator, I recommend that you check out rxjs.dev/operator decision tree, because for many, many of the things that we're trying to do, there's already an operator. And so that is one case where you probably shouldn't build an operator, if you can take advantage of something that someone has already built. And so this is a really cool interactive decision tree where you can click on what type of thing that you have and what type of thing you want, and then it will walk you through the different operators that exist in RxJS and say, hey, the operator you're looking for already exists. Here it is. Go and use this one. So I definitely recommend you start there so you're taking advantage of what people have already built. So to understand an operator, let's take this really simple example. So we have an observable, and we are piping it through 3 different operators. So these are just built in to RxJS. So you've got maps. So we're going to take the X object, and we're going to turn it into the x.data subproperty. And so we're just kind of unwrapping that X object and getting its data out. Then I'm calling share replay. And so that means anyone that subscribed to this is going to get the exact same value without us having to re-execute that same observable, which is really helpful when you're doing things like HTTP calls, where you don't want to execute multiple HTTP calls or multiple fetches from the backend. And we can do something like take until, where we're going to be passing in a destroy observable or subject, and then we're going to listen to that observable until the component is destroyed, for example. So this is an example case where you can take those 3 individual chained operations and turn them into a custom operator. So an operator under the hood is basically a function that takes in an observable of type A and returns an observable of type B. And so each of those operators that we saw takes A into B, B into C, C into D. And then so you, at the end of the day, you took an observable on type A, and now you get out an observable on type D. That is really, really important for understanding how you build these things, but it can feel like an oversimplification when you're actually using these things. So a operator has a really, really simple signature. It's a function that takes in a source observable and returns an observable. Right? These can be different types. They can be the same type. It is up to you and what your operator is trying to achieve. And we'll look at kind of both types within this talk. So within the function, within your operator, you're going to do something. Most often, you're going to be subscribing to some sort of source, doing something with the outputs that it comes back with, and creating a results observable. And there's a bunch of ways that we can do this. What we see across the board is that operators are usually parameterized. So I showed that you could just take in a source observable and return a result observable. But usually what we're doing is we're actually wrapping that in a extra function call that lets you take in parameters. And so if you think about take until, that is a parameterized operator that takes in a observable or a subject that you're listening to, and then using that to manage the mapping between the source observable and the result observable. So we'll take a bunch of look at examples and really dive into this. So an example of a repeater observable, maybe you're going to take or create a repeater observable that's going to repeat something over and over. So you're going to subscribe to the source observable n times or on n interval. And so you want to take that interval as a number. So that's an example of where parameterization ends up being really, really important. And we see that most operators are parameterized. So the first way to be building operators is just simple composition. So taking other operators that you know you want to call, and then calling them, and then using that to create your own operator. So this actually, I've found to solve most use cases. So most people do not need to build some really complicated scheduled new operator. You can really just say, hey, every time I make an HTTP request, I need to map it. I need to tap into it to do some sort of logging. I need to handle the errors. I want to automatically retry. I want to exponentially back off. So take all these things that I want to do a lot of the time, and you can abstract that into a single operator by combining and composing those sub operators. So let's imagine we have that http.get where we're doing that map, filter, and share. I can actually now turn that into an operator really, really simply. So I take a function, or I'm going to create a function called share unwrapped. It's going to take in that source observable. It's going to execute and return the result of that composed set of pipes. So you've got the map, you've got the filter and share replay, and then we just return that result. And effectively, what the pipe function does is it defines a mapping between a source observable and a result observable. And so you have now created your own operator called share unwrapped here, just by automating and abstracting the same sorts of operations that you're going to do again and again. So then using your kind of defined operator is really, really simple. So now we just, instead of calling that chain of operators, I can just call my share unwrapped function, or pass in share unwrapped to the pipe, and we're going to execute all of those individual operations as part of whenever we want to listen to this http.get. When you do this, testing becomes a lot easier. So if you had a test that said should unwrap and filter the data, before you would have had to say test each of those behaviors or copy and paste all that functionality. Now we can take a look at that share unwrapped and actually make sure that it does what we expect it to do. So we've got a test here where we're taking a little map of 4 items, an observable of these 4 items, and then we're piping it through share unwrapped, and we're subscribing, and then we're expecting the results equaling to this value, right? So it's really, really easy to look at one individual operator at a time and make sure that it's tested. So there's a ton of common use cases for why you don't want to create your own operator. So first and foremost, I find error handling to be really, really helpful to be doing via custom operators. So you can imagine, again, an HTTP request where in every HTTP request, you're catching errors and you're doing something with those errors. So instead of doing that in every HTTP request, create an operator called log error where you define, hey, here's what I want to do with this. And then you can pass that behavior on. And then when you want to implement and actually use this, you just pass log error. Right? Again, very, very simple. Another really interesting example that I see is what I call refreshers. So if you've ever been on a website and you've ever wanted to say, for example, build a auto refresh where the application will refresh every 5 minutes automatically or every 30 seconds, or if you wanted to create a little refresh button or a pull to refresh, you want to go refresh all the data on the page, make sure it's as fresh as possible, but you only want to do it when one of these triggers happens. And so you could, for example, create a refreshUpon operator that takes in some observable, and then whenever that other observable emits, we're going to refresh all of the data on the page. So this is actually a really easy operator to build. So if I was trying to build this refreshUpon operator, I could just take in that as the parameter and then define the source observable as being a switch map from the refresher. Right? So take whatever the user gives in, whether that's a refresh button clicks, pull to refresh, timers, whatever you want, and then just switch map on it. So we resubscribe to the source observable every time that user wants to interact. So I often do this in my application all over the place, where I want multiple ways of allowing the user to make sure that they have the freshest data instead of necessarily a cached version, for example, or something that's just living in memory. So we're going to do a live coding exercise here. So we're going to jump over to an Angular application, and we're going to actually build out our own operator. And the goal here is to add some really, really naive, really simplistic caching of an HTTP request. And we'll just use local storage because it's a really, really simple API. And so let's dive in. Just before we got here, I created a new Angular application. Just device mode. So brand new application, ng new. This should look very familiar. You're going to see we're on the latest version of Angular. So at time of filming, it's 10.0.02. And what we can do is, if we take a look at the code, this is just going to be a very, very basic app. And what we'll do is we'll just delete the entire app component. And let's actually make an HTTP request. So one of my favorite APIs to hit and just hammer, because it's super simple and basically everyone can access it, is the GitHub API. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create just a normal observable called repos. And then in my constructor, I'm going to use HTTP client. And we'll actually go and fetch from that. So before I can use HTTP client, I need to import it. So we'll just import HTTP client module, and we will import that from the right source. Got to spell client right, or the code doesn't end up working. All right, so we've got HTTP client module, and then in our app component, we should have access to this now, as long as we import it from the right spot. All right, so now we can actually go and hit a backend API. So the GitHub API is relatively easy to remember, so you can just say const path equals HTTPS API to github.com/search. We're going to search repositories. We'll just pass in a simple query like query equals Angular. So we'll look for repositories with Angular in the name. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this.repos equals this http.get. I'll just ignore typings for the moment. I'm going to pass in the path. And then one thing I'm going to do just to make it a little bit easier on myself is the GitHub API comes back with an object, and I want to get out the object's items property, which contains the array that we want to iterate through. So I'm just going to say pipe, and we'll say map list goes to list.items. We'll need to import map, just operators. This is where all of the built-in operators are stored. So we now have a repos observable that we should be able to subscribe to from our template. So we can say something like div and for equals that repo of repos. So we're going to automatically subscribe to that observable. And then we should just be able to say something like maybe an h1 with the repo.name. And we'll have maybe a p tag with the repo.description. And because this is a live demo, I'm almost certain something's gone wrong, but let's take a look here. No, nothing has gone wrong. So we see here we've got our h1s, we've got our p tags, and in the network tab, we will actually see that every time we load this page, we're making a fresh XHR out to the repositories list, getting in that list of items, and that is being rendered and mapped to the screen. So this has all just been normal Angular HTTP requests. But now let's actually create a new operator. So we have this, but it doesn't actually work offline. So for example, if I'm building a PWA, or if a user wants to use this application every day, every time I hit refresh, we have to go back and hit the network and wait for that network request. It would be better if we could render something a little bit faster, a little bit sooner, based on the assumption that the data we have is probably pretty accurate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new operator. So what we'll do is we'll just throw it in the same file here, and we'll say export function, share and replay. And so again, what our goal is we want to, share and cache. What our goal is to take this observable that we get from HTTP and cache it. And if there is a cache version, we want to use that one right away. And so what I'm going to do is I'll define this share and cache. And what we'll do is we'll take in a key. So we'll call this storage key. Just as I said, most ArcGIS operators are going to be parameterized. And then what we'll do is we will just return. And we're going to use composition here for the most part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a new function, I'm going to return a new function that takes a source and returns some sort of resulting observable. So we've got a source observable, typings. What we can do is we can say source dot pipe. We're going to execute 3 different operators here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute first a tap. So we'll import tap. And what I'm going to do is every time we get a value from the source observable, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say local storage key equals JSON.stringify the value. So what this first one does is every time we get a new value from the database, or excuse me, every time the source observable, whatever we're listening to, so that in this case, it'll be an HTTP request that has been mapped, and we'll store that. We'll just store it in whatever storage key the user gave us. Then second, what I want to do is I want to start with. This is a operator that immediately synchronously gives you the value that you have, and then executes the underlying observable, and then gives you any remaining values that it emits. And so the nice thing is when you combine start with an HTTP request, you will synchronously immediately get the stored value from the cache. And then as the HTTP request actually finishes, whether that takes a second or whether that takes an hour, it will then refresh automatically with the extra data. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with JSON.parse, our local storage value of storage key. And just to make sure we actually get something, I will pass in an empty array if we don't have something. And what we'll do is we'll do something called share replay. Share replay is one of my favorite operators because when you create an observable and when you use observables in Angular, you might end up listening to that observable in a lot of different places. So for example, if you're building a service that stores all of your data in one place, every time you subscribe to that service, you don't want to be creating more HTTP backend requests. You want to be creating all these different network connections that are duplicating the same data. And what share replay does is it says, no matter how many people subscribe to me, only create one subscription to the source observable so that we can share the values that it gets instead of kind of having this kind of multiplexing that can happen. So we've got those 3, and let's just get rid of types just for now. We can fix this later if we need to. All right, it actually wants me to give typing, so let's do it. So as we know, a operator is parameterized, and it has to return a function. So we'll say source observable type T. And it's going to give us an observable of type T. So one of the things that's interesting and unique about the way that we're doing this here is that we're not actually changing the type. So I've mentioned several times that it takes an observable one type and returns one of another type. With this operator, because I want the user to be getting back the exact same data they're expecting, even if it's coming from the cache, we know that the types are going to match. And so we can just use T for both of those things. All right, so we've defined our operator. So now it's actually putting it to use. So we're already calling the map operator here. So I think we can just now say share and cache. Let's come up with a key here. So let's maybe say GitHub repo list. All right, so what I've done is I've defined this observable operator called share and cache. It does a bunch of things under the hood. It stores data, it fetches data, and then all we have to do with every HTTP request that we want to use that on is we can say share and cache. And now if we take a look at our application, what we should see is all the data is still there, but when I hit refresh, the data should render even before the network comes back. So if we slow down our network here, let's make this a little bit smaller. Let's just make it a slow 3G. What we should see when I hit refresh, the application is going to load. And even before this XHR returns, the data is there. So we've made our application seem much, much faster. And if you were using something like a PWA, where maybe you don't even have a network connection, all of this data would be loaded, and then that network request might fail, and the application would keep working, right? The underlying implementer, the component here, doesn't have to care about where this data is coming from. And even our repos variable here, it's using really simple primitive ideas, right? Get the object in the right shape for me to actually render it on the screen, and then make sure it's there and make sure it's fast. So we've got these very, very simple concepts that we're using and composing here. All right, so we've been successful. We built this kind of local share and cache tool using local storage, but I just want to call out that that is an overly simplistic example. If you're trying to do this at home, what happens when the user tries to modify the cache data? So let's say you're not using observables in Rx throughout the application. Let's say you have some sort of local state. If the user kind of modifies that data, it's going to disappear when the next version comes in. You can also have a disruption of expectations if a page reflows, right? Like if your HTTP request is returning something completely different to what the user loaded initially, is that actually worse? Are you showing them the wrong data first? That could actually be worse. And you also have things like race conditions, like what happens if the user tries to modify that initial data before that XHR returns. So be careful with these things. As with everything, there are risks when you start caching. Cache invalidation is one of the hardest problems in computer science, as we all know. And so just be a little bit careful if you're using the code that I have talked to. We got a question here. It's really, really easy. I'll just show two. Answer both these questions real quick. So the question is, can this operator be stored in a separate file? Absolutely. Because we've got that nice export function, we can just say share and cache. So obviously we need to do all the appropriate imports, but if I can just import now share and cache, so now it's in a separate file. And the other question was, where am I subscribing to the final observable? And I'm doing it right here in my async pipe. So all the work I'm doing in the component is setting up this stream of data. I'm saying, you've got this data in GitHub. I want it to flow via an HTTP request. And then I'm going to reshape it here. And then I'm going to pass it on. Then I'm going to cache it here. And then I'm going to emit that final value. And so this repos variable is exactly what we want. It's the cached intelligent list of repositories. And so the only place I ever need to subscribe to it is in the template. And so this async pipe is automatically subscribing and unsubscribing. Let's say I have this component is unloaded for some reason, I'm going to a different page. We're automatically going to stop listening to that observable. So it's very, very powerful. And this is actually the way that we recommend most people use observables, which is use your component, use your services, get the data in the exact shape you want, and then render it, which makes my template really, really simple. And it makes my template agnostic to where that data is coming from. So I could, in the backend, switch this repos object to be using Firebase. It could come from a real-time database. It could be doing long polling. It could be any of these number of things. We could using it database to store it. The template doesn't care. The template just says, I know what data I need. Let me render that to the screen. All right. So there's a couple other examples. So we've talked about refreshers. So composition, it breaks down complex functions. It allows you to name things, which this is something that I didn't even think was a big deal, but then there was a nice talk by someone at Google, which is that even for simple things, even the simplest mapping that you're doing, where you just look at the code for 10 seconds and you understand what it does, think about extracting that. Think about creating an operator that names it, because whenever a developer can look at something that's named versus having to go and look at implementation, they better understand your intent. And it makes all of your code more reusable. As you saw, we can put that operator in a separate file and use it across the entire application, or even share it, ship it to NPM and let other applications use it. And it makes that individual operator more testable and makes my code more testable because I'm testing the right things at the right time. All right, so we talked about composition, right? This is one of the easiest ways to create operators when you know you have to do 5 or 6 things. Maybe it was compose them, but sometimes you want to create something from scratch. There's a quote from Carl Sagan, I think. I'm probably misattributing this, but create an operator from scratch, one must first create the universe, which is not quite true. There's a lot of tools to help you. Again, are you sure you need to create one from scratch? There's over 60 operators. Take a look at that decision tree that I mentioned. You might not need to create something. But if you do want to create your own operator from scratch, there's 3 things you're going to need to understand. The first is new observable, which is the method for creating observables. You're going to need to know about a subscriber and subject. And so let's start with the new observable. So when you create a new observable, you pass in a subscriber, which takes in which is of type subscriber, and then has some teardown logic, which is relatively simple. The way that I explain subscribers to most people is it's a little bit like creating a new promise. So when you say new promise, you give it a method that has a resolve method and a reject method. And then whenever you want to, for example, as part of a set timeout, you can resolve or reject all of the results of that promise. And the same thing is true with a subscriber, right? When you pass in a new observable, you're creating a subscriber, and that subscriber is the thing that you can call next on. It's the thing you can call complete on. It's the thing you can call error on. So relatively simple. There's this thing called a subject, which is basically a holding place for values in history that you can next. So there's a bunch of implementations of this with kind of slightly differing feature sets, but there's behavior subject, replay subject, etc. And one thing that Nir called out is that event emitter within Angular. So when you're creating an output and you're creating an event emitter, that actually is a subject, right? It extends subject under the hood. And so you can rely on all those sorts of behaviors. So let's imagine if we were trying to implement this map function, right? So map takes in a value and returns a modified value. That is something that's true. It's a built-in operator, but if you wanted to build it yourself, what you could do is you could define this map function of types T and R, where you take in a observable of type T and you're returning it, or taking a value of type T and returning a value of type R. And then you could take that source observable and then create a new observable of your own that whenever that source observable emits a next, then you're going to emit yourself. If you're going to take the source observable errors, you could error as well. And if the source observable completes, you can complete. And so you'll notice that it's in the middle here, this subscriber.next. That's where we're just wrapping the value we're getting with our function call. So really, really simple, pretty straightforward. But this operator is incomplete in a lot of ways. What happens if that function throws? What should happen with my observable? I should probably throw an error then. What happens if we're tens or hundreds of nexts deep, right? So if you look back at this code, I'm calling next here every time. But what if I want to simplify? What if the call stack gets too big because of how this observable is being used, right? There's a lot of problems here. And you also notice there's no cleanup, right? We're not actually throwing anything away. We're not tearing down properly when we complete things. And so think about these sorts of problems when you are trying to build your own operation from scratch. To take another example, you can look at a retry with exponential backoff. So retry with exponential backoff is something you often want to do with HTTP requests, where if the first one fails, try again in a second, try again in 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 8 seconds, whatever. And so here we're going to define a subscriber that has next, error, and complete. And if it nexts, then the underlying observable just worked fine. We're just going to pass through the value and maybe store a count. If it errors, then maybe what we want to say is, assuming we haven't errored again more than max tries, we're going to create a new subscription to that source, and we're going to try again. So we're going to reinitialize that source subscription, and then we'll wait some amount of time based on the current count. And then if we complete, we just complete. So we're passing through both the next behavior and the complete behavior, but we're interrupting the error behavior so that instead of just erroring ourselves, we're going to actually try again unless we've hit the max tries on the subscription. So there's a few principles that you should remember when you're building your own custom operators. There's this idea of hot versus cold. A cold operator is something where you can subscribe to it, and it doesn't actually execute until something else listens to it. So you, for example, when you create an http.get observable, it doesn't actually make that HTTP request until something subscribes, right? That observable is cold. Whereas others, you can actually subscribe immediately upon creation of the observable. And it's up to you when and where you want to use that. So just be aware of when and where you're activating the subscriptions, and make sure that you're executing the underlying code at the right time. Also worry about these errors, things like completions, think about edge cases, because if you create an operator and you're not implementing those things, then other operators that have these expectations around the behavior might not be executing in the right way. So I really do recommend that everyone out there build a custom operator, just compose some of the things, abstract the code, give it names, because eventually, if you do this right, you can kind of live in this idealized world, right? Where you have some TypeScript that defines an observable in this pure form. It's been properly formatted all along the way in terms of chaining from the subscription, or excuse me, from the service down to your component. And then you get in the perfect shape. And then in your template, it's a really, really simple to just say pipe async. And so this is the beautiful world that we think that developers can live in. And that's the world that we want to share with everyone. So go create your own operators, be successful. And thank you so much. Okay, so we've got a question here. How to use concurrent subscribe? I'm not entirely certain what you mean by concurrent subscribe, but you could, for example, define an operator that takes in multiple subscriptions. So let's imagine you're trying to implement your own combine latest, right? So your combine latest operator would take in, by its parameters, a bunch of observables, and then you would do something on all of those observables. Maybe you create a subscription for each of them, and then wait for each of the subscriptions to emit a value. And then only when all of them have emitted a value, then you emit a value. So that would be an example of subscribing to a bunch of observables and then using those as part of your subscriber to create your next behavior so that you only emit once you've satisfied certain conditions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any other questions you want to ask? Let's see, anything. There's a small latency between when I speak and when they see it. And also a small latency of when they write their comments. I receive it on my admin screen, so forgive me for that. I see several thank you messages. Let me just bring Nir here just to say thank you to Nir as well. It was awesome having you guys. And now we have a little raffle to do. I'm going to give it like a few, like really a short minute. If somebody else hasn't entered the raffle and wants to enter, you get a few seconds. So the first raffle will be for one WebStorm license. So if you can pick a number anywhere between 1 and 57.
Any number between 1 and 57. I feel like I want to pull up a spreadsheet and do it randomly, but I'll just say 56.
56. So we have Ronnie Bar David winning a JetBrains license. Yay, that's your first winner. We got greetings from Ecuador. That's awesome. We have international guests joining us. That's really, really awesome. Neil, now you pick the second license. Any number between now somebody joined. Anywhere between 1 and 58, not including 57.
I would say 12.
12. So we have Udi Mazor, the constant winner. I'm pretty sure that's the one that usually wins awards. That's really, really awesome. And the last prize goes to a free Angular Up ticket. Goes to Stephen. You pick a number.
I'm going to pick a number. Stephen.
29.
29. We have Bar Deutsch. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly. But you just won yourself a ticket to Angular Up. I will email you the awards later today. And thank you again so much. We had a lot of clappings and congrats to the winners. And I'm sure both Nina and Stephen are both approachable. If you want to ask them personal questions regarding the talks, I will post a link to this video at the meetup and tweet it and whatnot. Thank you again. Stay home, stay safe, and
thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks for coming.